Hi, again, I'm David Walker. It's difficult to follow two public servants as eloquent and as esteemed as the two I'm following. And just to present polling data. So, Marvin Gaye, polling data. Let me say, 2010 was a difficult year for me politically. For the second time in my career, I lived through a Republican takeover of the House. My son also lost his election for his class president. He's in second grade. There are 8 boys and 8 girls in his class, and he was running against a little girl named Sydney. The first vote, all 8 boys voted for my son Zach, and all 8 girls voted for Sydney. As anyone who has a second grader knows, every second grade classroom in this country is deeply divided. You know, actually, it's even more bitter than the partisan divide here is the division between boys and girls in elementary schools across this country. So it was 8-8, and they had a second vote. One of the little boys defected, voted for Sydney. Sydney won. This little boy was asked later, "Why did you vote for Sydney?" And the little boy said, "Because Sydney lets him look at his paper during quiz time." What I learned there is sometimes politics is more complicated than it appears. We're in the middle of a great debate, and the debate has often been oversimplified by not only advocates on both sides, but also by the press. We have one side that talks about cutting spending. They talk about the budget, about the debt ceiling, and the deficit, and we have another side that talks mostly about Medicare, Social Security. Just driving into work today, I heard a Democratic attack on the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act, and it said Americans will not tolerate these cuts in Medicare. That's true. It's true as far as it goes, but it's not the entire story. I'm going to show you some data on these slides. It's data from a poll we did in April. There's also data that I pulled from the public sphere that's a little bit more recent. And what it's going to show is that while Medicare cuts are deeply unpopular, so are cuts to children's programs. In fact, they're just as unpopular. Cuts in Medicaid are just as unpopular as cuts in Medicare. No one talks about that. I will also show that while voters know that there's a choice, there are other ways to reduce the deficit than cutting these programs, whether you're talking about Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, children's programs, or whatever. There are options, and these are options that politicians refuse to look at, or at least some politicians. And these are choices that politicians are unwilling to make. We're gonna, how do you start it? Can we start the, oh, there we go. I'm sorry. What am I pointing at? I'm sorry. Oh, okay.
There you go.
Yeah. So, men are supposed to be good at this. All right, these first few slides, I'm just going to do this briefly. A lot of you know this. This is just the state of the country. Huge wrong track numbers. They've been huge wrong track numbers forever. The last data point was from June. It's actually a little bit higher now if you look at national polling. This is a long-term time series from Democracy Corps. Voters are very frustrated. They're frustrated candidly at both parties. And in fact, if you look at, I just worked on 2 national surveys in the last 2 weeks that came out of the field. The number of independents, the number of self-ascribed independents is exploding. And the reason why it's exploding is because voters are drawing conclusions about both parties, and those conclusions are not particularly edifying. The current congressional vote is very competitive. The political environment is very competitive. It reflects, a fairly, to be honest, a fairly competitive debate over the budget. Democrats lost the congressional vote by 7 points. We've come back. I'm a Democrat. I'm going to say we. We've come back. It's even now in some polls. It's slightly down. In this other poll, Democrats still have a long way to go among independents. Independents are really who drove the Republican victory in 2010. and there's still a lot to prove there. Voters take the budget crisis very seriously. We are in a different place. This is not the same kind of budget debate we had last time, the last time the government was shut down. They are deeply concerned about spending, they're deeply concerned about debt, and they're deeply concerned about the deficit. In fact, you know, they actually oppose, and this is a question doesn't ask it about anything. There's, you know, not a lot of verbiage here. It just asks an up or down. You know, do you favor, oppose raising the debt ceiling? I mean, this is a position that is portrayed as extreme in Washington. It's mainstream in the country. Oh. But, and this is the important point, it's not the only crisis. They also see a crisis when it comes to our children, a deep crisis, a crisis that's getting worse. This was from our first focus survey. We asked voters whether they believe the lives of American children have gotten better, gotten worse, or no change over the last 10 years. 58% said it's getting worse. I mean, just think about the history of this country, what the American dream used to be. You know, we all used to say, even working class people say, you know, our goal is to leave our children better off than we were. You know, by better than nearly 3 to 1, people are saying our children are worse off. This is what I want to get to. They're open to revenue. Most of you know this. This is not secret polling. It's you know, most people realize where voters are on this. They are rejecting the Grover-Norquist argument that there can be no revenue, there can be no tax increase. And this was from the first focus survey, and we asked voters, this is a split form question, we asked voters first straight up, what's a better approach for the deficit? Raising taxes or cutting important programs? No mention of the rich, no mention of taxes on the wealthy. Voters divide evenly, you know, which is pretty good. Then we asked about raising taxes on people earning over $1 million a year. It's clearly overwhelming. You know, it's clearly the preferred approach. A lot of people on the right like to portray this debate as a choice between, you know, what I would consider unconscionable cuts in important programs and unsustainable deficits, and it's not. You know, the point is there are other options. Voters are also split about what is driving the deficit. You know, you'll see that it's not just, you know, it's not just spending in the eyes of voters. It's not just spending. It's also about subsidies for corporations and problems in the tax code. By the way, First Focus, I am told, will post this PowerPoint on their website. So if you're trying to take notes, don't bother. This next slide is one I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about because it's critically important for what everyone here does and what First Focus does, and it really helps frame, I think, the main argument of this research and the main argument of this presentation. Rather than asking voters whether you favor or oppose this cut or that cut, what we asked them here is whether these programs we provide on this as a battery, a list of programs, whether these programs should have major reductions, minor reductions, or no reductions in their funding. This is a metric I really like. I gotta confess, it's a metric that we plagiarized, stole from another pollster, but it worked very well. The main point to this is, look what's at top. These numbers are the people who are saying no reductions. Everything on the top of the list involves children. And the other thing I want to point out is, look at Medicaid and Medicare. Exact same number. And yet, when we hear the debate, what we hear about is Medicare. We don't hear about kids. We don't hear about Medicaid. There are other questions here where we ask more directly about Medicaid cuts. The one on, I guess it's your left, is a question from Pew. Pew asked whether states should be able to cut back on people eligible for Medicaid in order to deal with their budget problems, or whether low-income people should not have their Medicaid benefits taken away. It's pretty convincing. Voters are saying Medicaid should not be taken away.